as a leader or as anyone in an organization that has the appropriate seats for yourself, when you think of that comment of someone should do something about that, reflect on the point that you probably are the someone and you actually have the ability to do something about it.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today, where IT leaders share their tough challenges, creative solutions, and latest insights. You'll discover fresh ideas and inspiration here with your host, IT staffing veteran and president of Claremont Technologies, Jody Kulik-Mayer. And now, here's Jody.
As the Interim Co-Global CIO at a global real estate company, Sal Companieh is an authentic leader driving an accelerated digital transformation. She is currently focused on utilizing the power of their platforms to establish highly connected, prescriptive processes that collect, curate, and optimize data at every step. This enterprise platform connectivity, along with leading security and infrastructure, is the backbone of the data and analytics strategy, as well as the driving force to enabling global functional operating models. With more than 20 years of consulting experience in process, operating model, and technology transformation, Sal has been a change agent with proven success leading a global real estate company through numerous large-scale acquisition integrations and global platform deliveries. She's done so by establishing herself as a model executive who leads with empathy and conviction while enabling a collaborative and inclusive environment. Sal is a member of the company's executive leadership program and executive sponsor of the Mentorship Council within the Women's Integrated Network Employee Resource Group. She actively mentors colleagues throughout the firm and takes great pride in the diversity of her team and the professional growth that they openly foster. Sal recently accepted the honor of inaugural member of the T200 Lift program. Welcome, Sal. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jody.
It's my pleasure. Adam Stanley was kind enough to introduce us, and when we talked about the podcast, he said, you must get Sal on because she has so much to offer the tech community. So, again, I really appreciate it.
He is a great friend and way too kind, so I appreciate the connection.
So, on March 11th, 2020, the WHO declared a global pandemic, and here we are at the 2-year anniversary. So, what are your thoughts on this anniversary?
Honestly, never thought we would be 2 years in and in the situation that we're in right now. The ebbs and flows of emotion from the pandemic intersecting with racial injustice, intersecting with financial pressures have just been such a heavy, heavy weight on a lot of people's shoulders in the world at large. In particular, in a work environment, it has led to a lot more authentic conversations taking place. So I am hopeful we do not celebrate the 3rd anniversary the same way in the situation we are today. I am hopeful I do not send my kids to school with masks at the 3rd anniversary, but I also recognize that there's only certain things we can control. And so a very old friend used to say, control the controllables. And so right now I'm trying to control the controllables with my actions in my personal life and in my professional life. So it is amazing to me to see what science has been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. And so I hope we take those learnings and apply them to other diseases and abilities to support with illness worldwide. But right now, I'm just hopeful we are not in the same place in a year from now.
I agree. It's been a whirlwind of things and have caused people to really evaluate where they are in their life and their job and their family time.
The intersections you chose, where you spent your time, the bubble, if you will, that you created for yourself. It was interesting that it was dictated by things that you didn't probably prioritize prior to the pandemic, right? So a lot of learnings around who you surrounded yourself with, where you spent your time, where you spent your energy, that I hope we as humanity do not forget as we get past this step and this milestone.
It's true. It's true. So have these 2 years changed your philosophy on leadership and how you work with your team?
So it's interesting. I don't know that it's changed my philosophy. I feel like it's amplified things that we were doing before. So we were always a very open, authentic, transparent team. But this experience has definitely amplified that. So we started to experience the pandemic as leaders sitting in the US because of our colleagues that were in China or that were in EMEA, and pre-experiencing the pandemic through the eyes of a colleague was a different type of listening skill. And so your empathy points were always there, but you had to mature your empathy points as part of those conversations. And as the pandemic came to the US, and over the past 2 years, everybody's been in a different state. We have colleagues in Sydney who have been in extreme lockdown for a period of time. And so it was always this concentration of making sure that your celebration of your ability to have a little bit more freedom wasn't almost a in your face to those colleagues that were in a really tight lockdown period or situation. So it opened up really great dialogue. So I don't necessarily see it as I changed my leadership style, as we were fortunate enough to already have a very open and authentic conversation going. It simply amplified it, and it made it deeper into the organization, that the way we spoke to each other, the things we talked about, I don't believe I ever concentrated on mental health as much as we have in the past 2 years. So while it wasn't ignored, it wasn't as amplified. And so now we're having a lot of conversations openly about mental health. And there's colleagues sharing things that I would have never 10 years ago ever dreamed of colleagues sharing with each other in a work setting around where they are mentally. So I think it's proving to be a great thing for how you can bring colleagues together and get to know each other, but also help frame those empathy points differently. So again, similar to, I hope that we learn our lessons. I do hope this level of concentration on mental health and empathy points and bringing your whole authentic self to work stay as a foundation to how we come to work every day and how we engage with our colleagues, versus what I feel was more prominent before, which was you had a work persona and you had a personal persona. And those personas have melded quite a bit over the past 2 years.
Right. It's difficult, right, when your children are home and you're working. So they're at home, quote, going to school. You're trying to run your meetings. And it's a tough time to balance it all. So you're no longer keeping it separately. So I think you said this to me, the pandemic blew the walls off the separation between work and home. So
it gave conversation points and connection points to people that they didn't have before, right? So you'd quickly be like, I'm making dinner, or well, what are you making, right? So it was just an introduction point to different conversations that are a little bit more personal than the rigidity of work conversations.
Right. You see people's children, you see their dog, even their home office.
Yeah, the pictures behind the home office or the musical instruments that are behind them all yield different conversations that we didn't really take the time for and or counted on face-to-face interaction to bring about. So tons of great knowledge learned about my team over the past 2 years.
Right. And I know a lot of companies over the past few years have been adding mental health benefits to their benefits package. Is that something that you're seeing as well? I mean, it does seem like an evolving.
It's definitely an evolving support line. And so, yes, we've seen the scene here, but we've also seen a lot more manager-employee conversations around the topic. So while we have a lifeline into benefits and support, we're effectively toolkitting our managers with a little bit more guidance on what to look for across the board, right? So we have not only the pandemic, we had the racial injustice, we've had a high volume of just natural disasters that have hit our colleagues. So all of these things coming together as a manager have similar undertone of topics that you want to talk about, you want to think about. We had colleagues that were living in a state with no family. So during the pandemic, their colleagues were their main lifeline during the week. And making sure that during the weekend they had some touch points with colleagues as well to make sure that they never felt alone. Those are things that prior to the pandemic, we all took for granted that everybody was able to kind of find their own way. And managing through this, the culmination of the layers of pressure that the teams have been on, you watch out for your team differently than you did before. Or maybe you did it before, just not as amplified.
Right. Yes, this definitely amplifies everything because it's life and death, not something that has ever been in my experience and the whole world experiencing it at one time.
Agreed.
It's a lot. So this is all happening and you still have a job to deliver. So how did you move your team forward?
So we had, I would say it's multiple layers, right? The first layer was as authentic and transparent as conversation as we could have. So while a lot of organizations were struggling with transitions to working remote, we were blessed in the fact that we were very well versed in working remote. We were toolkitted to do so. We are a highly SaaS organization, so we've been able to manage. What this did is accelerate some of the digital transformation we were already on the path to do, similar to a lot of other firms. So what we've been able to do and what yielded was a lot more work coming in. So openly discussing capacity and watching out for teams that made a normal 9-hour workday into a 12 to 14-hour workday because of access. And, it was very common to hear, well, I have nothing else to do, so I'll just work. Those types of things we had to monitor and discuss on a very open basis. And frankly, leading by example, right? So I can't be sending emails at midnight if my expectation is my team is not responding to me. So we would lead by example as leaders. I would have my kids come in and out of video or there was noise, but the focus on making sure that the team was healthy first and foremost, coupled with the transparency of the work that we're doing and the why we're doing it, helped us just stay focused. We have delivered more in the last 2 years than we had in the prior 3. We've delivered large scale enterprise solutions which always used to require in-person workshops and solutioning 100% remote. We have done acquisitions and integrations 100% remote. So the way you build trust in an acquisition and integration through that proverbial breaking of bread, we couldn't do. So we had to get very creative around the types of quote unquote social events we would have, right? So at the beginning, it was very, very hip and very popular to get on a Zoom happy hour, but those started to wane. So the work got done. We were able to put health first, mental health and physical health first. And it unified the team to make sure we were always rotating resources and covering for each other. So it gave that sense of purpose and sense of belonging to teams. And we use those balance to drive out some incredible work that the organization has benefited from tremendously at this point.
Wow, that's fantastic. So was there anything specific that you did to replace the in-person workshop, or was it just the development of the relationship?
We started with the relationships because if you don't have trust, a lot of the time in the workshop goes to challenging each other because there's an underlying current of distrust. And so we worked heavily on the trust. We also worked on, like I said, just the transparency of why we're asking certain questions or why we're going down a certain decision path. Because when you're away from your colleagues and you don't have the hallway chatter, the story you create in your head is the truth. And so the more transparent of a dialogue, we've had a number of meetings we called Mythbusters. There was a lot of myths out there, and we would get together and just have the Mythbuster meetings just to kind of debunk any of the discomfort that was being felt. So I think there's a core component. And then in terms of the remote sessions, what we used to cover in a day, we would break down into chewable chunks into a multi-day session. But then that meant we had to replan the entire deliverables, right? So what we staged in a 3-month period, we did in a slightly longer timeline. However, we made sure everybody that needed to be there was there at the same time. So there was some planning and rebaselining of plans that we had to do. But overall, it was the crux of it was the trust that we had to build.
Right. Right. That's the foundation of everything.
Once you have that, you have such smoother conversations. And frankly, when there is friction, you have a lot more honesty in the friction discussions versus a us-them mentality that brews very quickly in situations like this.
Right. And I think when there's trust, there's more of a problem-solving mentality, right? Instead of a finger pointing, you're all on the same team.
Agreed. You have the common mission. So once you have that common mission and you have the trust, then you can work through a lot of things differently and more agile than you used to, than you did if you didn't have the trust level there.
I love the idea of the Mythbusters meeting. Now, that's hard to say, Mythbusters.
It's a little bit of a tongue turner.
It is. So did you have people come bring things to the fore, or did you hear things around that you knew were not correct? So how did you come up with what you were going to address?
So we have this thing that we do at the end of pretty much any executive governance meeting where we say, is what we just discussed match the noise on the ground? And the minute you ask that question, it's amazing how open the dialogue gets. And you'll start to get, well, I'm actually hearing noise about this that we didn't cover, or that the risk that we discussed is far greater in impact than we were giving it a time for. And that mentality and the openness of allowing for those conversations to get bubbled up without it becoming a problem that you're raising a concern, those fundamentals allowed us to have eyes on things that were out there, noise that was out there that wasn't really brewing up correctly. And then turning that into effectively a script of, okay, we're hearing that this is what is the belief, but the reality is A, B, or C. And just stating the fact that we're listening and we're actively listening definitely turned a lot of people to having a higher willingness to share their concerns. There's always a balancing act, right? You don't want to hear every concern just for the sake of concern. However, there's a lot to be said around making sure that you never make anyone feel like their voice is not being heard. And that core of listening and reacting to those either realities or misperceptions through the Mythbuster meetings was a key success factor for us.
And what a great question to ask if what you're saying is what people are hearing around. So
yeah, no, it's worked out really well for us.
Yeah. For people to add that to their repertoire, that is a fabulous question. So how did you get into IT?
Believe it or not, by accident. I did not intend this career path. I actually started in distribution and manufacturing, went to school for it, loved my program, had every intent to go into distribution, joined consulting right out of school, and ended up having to apply the distribution skills to more the technology of delivering the distribution transformation. And it has kind of blossomed from there. And I've been in consulting. I love the integration and the intersection of technology, data, and process, and have found that the language that brings them together is a key to growth for a lot of organizations. And so that's kind of how my journey started, is by accident.
Right. And it's interesting. My journey into recruiting happened by accident as well. So I guess that's how a lot of people come about their careers. It's interesting that you've gotten into IT by accident and now you're at a CIO level. So was that a goal of yours, or like what was your journey?
I would love to say that 10 years ago, I sat down and I sketched my dream board and said, yes, I'm going to be a CIO in 10 years. That is far, far, far from what happened. The journey was, I genuinely still love the concept of strategic consulting, right? And the core skill sets that you use there. And fundamentally grew in consulting. When I had my kids, I did the opposite of a normal move and I went independent. And so I did consulting. after a while, looking for something internal, came into my current organization and have managed to grow tremendously over the last 10 years and have had the opportunity to do so, which has been phenomenal. It wasn't until about 2 to 3 years ago where you have that career path aha moment of those that I had, when I was younger in my career, had always looked up to and said, wow, it must be amazing to be in that C-level chair. And what must happen in those conversations were slowly demystified for me due to opportunity and access. And so you start to think of yourself as slightly different, as, okay, maybe it's not as far reaching as I had originally planted in my head. So then started to work towards what the core skill set gaps would be or what opportunities of growth there are, and very vocally brought those forward for those opportunities. And when they came to fruition, I jumped on them. So I am not the vision board type of person. I'm just not, but I have great affinity for those that are. It's amazing to me what they're able to do. But I do fundamentally have grown up in both a house and just a broader community that believed in continuous growth and grit. And those two things together, I have no doubt will continue to serve me. And I'm hopeful that I can pass those same two core capabilities onto my kids. But that's kind of how I've landed to where I am today.
Right. You mentioned you had, I guess, access to information. So was that a mentor? Was that a group? How did you get the access to the information and how to navigate?
A couple of different ways. One, as we discussed at the beginning of the call, I had a phenomenal boss for the last 7 years plus who was very open to having these types of conversations, right? And not only was open, but pushed to say, okay, what do you want next? And that open dialogue and transparency to the conversations was a stepping stone for me to start asking different questions, to think differently, to network differently, and using my network to kind of just learn about what is the role of a C-suite executive, what are the core capabilities, et cetera. So multiple years ago, I had an opportunity to do a divisional CIO role, which was probably to this date one of the best experiences of my life, just because it was a very concentrated period of time where I was in a position to grow. I had to lean into that position and that opportunity, but I also had to learn a lot around what makes an entire organization tick. So I think there's a balancing act of, as you're growing in your career path, having that open, vocal response of what you're looking for, even if you're not quite sure if the component parts that you're looking for, having that discussion with your management line, but also once those opportunities are afforded to you, to lean into them and lean into them hard. I fundamentally believe this. There's absolutely no one in your network that you can't learn from. So it doesn't matter if they're in the same career progression, if they are in the same industry, there is something that you can learn from every single person, whether it's working style, communication style, executive presence. All of those are things that you could watch for. And the moment you open yourself up to that, there's tremendous amount of access and learning at your fingertips. But it does take work on your part to actually make it into something that's manageable for you.
Right. So what are some of the groups that you belong to?
So group number one is World 50. I have had a phenomenal experience with World 50. They've been amazing partners, coaches, access to resources. They are fundamentally an organization that is built for and concentrates on the growth of rising executives and the C-suite. I also belong to a phenomenal group of female technical leaders that are charging themselves with the act of ensuring that females are continuing to grow in technology, by the name of T200, started by about 17 or so female CIOs with a goal of having 200 female CIOs in top positions. And they have flourished. And I think the communication channels with those groups are so important to me, and the resources there, just by seeing the commonality of questions that we're raising, the commonality of experiences we have, it definitely gives you a net to fall into when you feel like you have nowhere else to go. And then broadly, my own internal network within my organization is pretty widespread. There are people that we connect based on leadership and what we're doing in helping our teams be better people managers. There's people that are great at storytelling and how they navigate the ability to tell their story. So I think breaking down your own growth opportunities and finding someone that excels at it, regardless of how they apply that skill. You might apply it differently, but learning from them has been a really rich experience for me.
Right. I love that you took your experience like with groups and with women and started a women in tech group at your company. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So as one of the only female leads within our technology leadership group, I was looking around and participating in a lot of conversations around how we grow female talent in technology, and realized that there's more that I could be doing. And it's not perfect. It's not as mature as I would love it to be. But we started a dialogue with the female technology leaders. And it's simply a combination of transparent dialogue, sharing of educational material. So they would each be taking different, either in company or external courses around leadership or female leadership, and they would co-share. And seeing that group come together and discuss how we continue to grow this talent has been a super, super proud moment. Again, is it where I want it to be? No, but it is a starting position. It is a chat group that continues on a regular basis. They share opportunities. We had one phenomenal colleague that is also in our military employee resource group. And so she was explaining, she was doing a talk to the veterans group, and that chat was used to go ahead and support and just acknowledge that she's having this talk in however many hours it was. The number of women from the team that showed up to that talk that would have never shown up because they are not in the military and they would not have that experience, to show up just to show a sign of support for her doing a public speaking engagement and kind of talking about something outside of her work priorities, was so phenomenal to me and gave such energy to me and the rest of the group that I think the more of us female leaders or minority leaders in general, the more we look around and see a gap and the more we attempt to fill it ourselves, the better off I think we will be as a collective.
Right. I think it's fantastic to support each other and have a network right at work where it's needed and accessible.
Yep. Agreed.
Great for the individuals and the company because it's like a brainstorming hub.
It is a brainstorming hub. It's a connection network as well, right? So I might have connections to stakeholders or business colleagues that they don't, or vice versa. And I think it's a great connection point from them to always have at their fingertips.
Right. And you say that it's not perfect, but what is really perfect? And if you aim for perfect, nothing gets done.
Absolutely. Start moving the needle one way or another.
Right. Don't let it be the enemy of the good. That's something I always try to keep in mind. And I always say it's a marathon, right?
If the last 2 years has not taught us what a marathon looks like over a long period of time, nothing will.
That is for sure. So it was great speaking with you. Do you have any parting thoughts, Sal?
I would say one of the things that I've started probably 2 years ago saying, firstly to myself and then sharing with my teams, is as a leader or as anyone in an organization that has the appropriate seats for yourself, when you think of that comment of someone should do something about that, reflect on the point that you probably are the someone and you actually have the ability to do something about it, whether it's raising your voice, raising your hand to volunteer, whether it's creating a new forum. I would encourage everyone to just lean into their situation and not deflect it as somebody else's to fix, because we all have something to add.
What a great parting note. Sal, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It was excellent.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tech Talent Today, brought to you by Clearmont Technologies IT Staffing and Search. You can find out more at clearmonttech.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share. See you next time.